Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to review Perception Sensor Database and how it is used in the ePower suite with our eDrive Power Analyzer. If you've used the eDrive Power Analyzer before, you know that as you're setting up your power measurement, so if I double click on my inverter component here, I'm being asked for what current transducer is sitting in front of my current channel, because perception needs to know how to convert the signal that it's seeing on the current channel into the actual physical input that's being measured by the sensor. And we use the sensor database to do that. So the sensor database is a sheet in perception. If I go ahead and click on it here and move up to the top, you will see when you first go to, well, first of all, if you don't see the sheet in your perception screen, go to the Sheets menu, select Manage Sheets, find Sensor Database in the list and click on it. You're going to click the Load button in the left column to load that sheet, and then in the bottom left corner, set the default to show, and then that sheet will always be shown as perception starts each time. So once you have the sensor database open, you will notice at the top of the group, there's a GenDAC eDrive folder within the HBM sensor database. So these are common sensors that are used with our eDrive Power Analyzer. The most commonly used ones are the current transformers. Those are the current sensors that we see people use most often with eDrive. You're going to see two different types of sensors here in the database. You can notice at the top, we've got our HBM current transducers. We partner with DaniSense on those. But you see there's a double entry for each kind. Why is that? Well, we have two different modules that can be used in the eDrive Power Analyzer to make current measurements. Our original module was the GN610B, which has 6 voltage input channels, and therefore to measure the output of a current transducer that outputs current with those channels, you need to have a burden resistor in front of the channel. So any of the sensors in this list that have an HBR with a number after it as part of their name, that's a burden resistor. And so that is going to be a voltage output sensor. You can also tell that by, if you look very closely at the icons here, there's a little U subscript from that sensor that tells you it's a voltage output sensor. The number that's after the HBR is the value of the burden resistor. So 1 ohm or 2.5 ohms or 0.5 ohms. There's some 10 ohms as well. If you are using our GN310B power card, that module has current channels that can accept either current inputs or voltage inputs. So in that case, you don't have to worry about having a burden resistor in front of the channel. We've incorporated those burden resistors inside the module, and that current channel can support current directly. And so any of the sensors in this current transformer group that don't have an HBR after them, those are meant to be used with the GN310B current channels. And if you look very closely, you'll see there's a little I subscript on the icon there that tells you that's a current output sensor. So as you're deciding which current sensors you're going to use, let's say, for example, I have some LIM IT400 sensors that I can use for an upcoming test, but I have a GN310B power module. So I need a sensor database entry that doesn't have HBR as part of it. I want to measure that current directly. So what do? Well, I'm just going to create a new sensor in the sensor database that reflects the correct properties of that LEM IT400 directly. The easiest way to do that is to come up to one of these current output sensors. I know that's what I need. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to duplicate it. And now I can just adapt that sensor. So let's call this the LEM LEM IT400 sensor. Get rid of the module. And if I pull up, I Googled the LEM IT400, I find the data sheet, I go down to the electrical section, and it tells me the number of secondary turns for that current transducer is 2000. So I'm going to enter in 2000, which was already there, and it's 400 amps maximum and minus 400 minimum, plus 400 maximum. And then I can go down to the lower right-hand corner and hit apply to save those changes. And now what Perception has done is down at the bottom of the database where it says user sensor database in my GenDAC eDrive folder under current transformers, I now have a LEM IT400 sensor. So I could go back into ePower, double click on my setup, and I could select that user sensor database, my sensors. So it's under the eDrive formula or eDrive folder. There you go, current transformers, and there's my LEM IT400 sensor. So I can apply that. It will be used for all three of my phases of my power measurement. Now, what about if I want to actually take, rather than using the datasheet information, I have just gotten all these sensors calibrated, and I want to take the specific information from the datasheet so that I get a more accurate result. Then what I can do, and I've already created these sensors, but I would just duplicate that sensor. I'm going to create a sensor here. I'm going to include the serial number in the name or some kind of designator so I know which one that is. And then I'm going to click the checkbox for this is a unique sensor. And now the information that I enter in for this divider ratio, everything should come off the calibration sheet. And I've told Perception that this sensor will only be used once because it's a unique sensor. I'm going to pull the information off the calibration sheet. Now, what do I need to do in ePower to make that possible? I'm going to exit out of my setup dialog here. I'm going to go to the generic settings button, and under setup parameters, there's a transducer selection entry. By default, we set that entry to datasheet, but in the dropdown, you can say, I want that to be from the calibration certificate instead. So I close my setup, and now if I go to set up this component, and I say, oh, look, now I have 3 different entries for those sensors because I've told Perception the information is coming off of the calibration sheet. Therefore, I need to have a unique sensor for each of those 3 phases. So I'm going to go to user sensor database, and I'm going to pick each of my 3 sensors that I created using that specific data off the calibration data sheet. And that way, the scaling on each of those phases will be unique to the sensor that is sitting in front of that channel. Another note, if you ever need to measure a voltage that is higher than what the voltage channels you're using can support, the sensor database can also be used for those situations. So you'll see that we have some voltage probes listed in here. We have probes specifically designed to go in front of our power modules and give you up to 5 kV RMS entries. And then how would I do that in the ePower suite? Because here, if I double click on my setup dialog, I don't see an entry for a voltage transducer. It's only showing me current. The reason we do that is the majority of our users don't need to have a voltage sensor, a voltage transducer in front of their channels. Our modules can support either plus minus 1,000 or plus minus 1,500 volts or the new remote probes plus minus 2000 volts DC indirectly. So a lot of people don't need those transducers there. So we, by default, hide that, but in the setup parameter tab of the generic settings dialog, if I click show voltage transducers and close, and now open that setup panel again, now I have a voltage transducer entry. Because I still have unique sensors selected, I have 3 of them, and I could select that sensor that applies. Now, if I look, what you're going to see here is under voltage transducer, it's telling me none. Why is that? The reason is that when I go to my sensor database, all of the voltage transducers or voltage probes that I have available, none of those are unique. So ePower is filtering and only showing me sensors that have that checkbox. This is a unique sensor shown. And when there are no sensors that are unique, then it'll say that. So if I duplicate this one, tell it it's a unique sensor, 5 kilovolt RMS, serial number 123, and we'll just leave everything else the same, apply and save. Now, when I go back to ePower Suite and do that setup and look under voltage, now I have 1 voltage probe available. So I hope that makes it a little more clear how to use the sensor database and ePower. If you have any questions and need technical support with perception and eDrive or anything HBK related, feel free to contact us. Our US-based support email is support@usa.hbm.com, and our phone number is 1-800-578-4260. I'm Krista Tweed. Happy testing.